Okay, good morning, everyone. Perek Hey, Mishna Vav. Sa'ad Truma Shenafel of Hakas Mimeya. Sa'ad Truma fell into less than 100 times more. V'nidma'u, and therefore now it becomes a forbidden mixture. Now, v'nafel min hamaduma l'makim acher. And now from this mixture, which we say is Safek Truma, Safek Chulin, and we have to treat it like Truma, now some of it fell somewhere else. So again, the case is a sa'ah of Truma fell into Chulin. There was not enough Chulin to be mavatal, to nullify. What are we left with? We're left with meduma, a mixture of Chulin and Truma, which we have to treat like Truma. Now some of that mixture fell into another mixture. It now creates a questionable, a forbidden mixture, like something that is certain, that is for sure Truma. Meaning, Rebbe Lezer says, treat that which fell out, that which came out from this mixture. Treat what came out like it's completely Truma. Not like it's a mixture of Truma and Chulin, but like that is completely Truma. And if we can treat it like completely Truma, then you'll need 100 sa in the next mixture that it fell into to nullify what fell in. Rebbe Lezer is following a similar pattern as he said before. Rebbe Lezer said before that what you raise out, meaning in a situation where you took out the compensation sa'ah, we treat that like the original sa'ah that fell in. Here too, even though you're not taking anything out of it, but it came out. You weren't trying to take anything out. There's no purpose of taking anything out because it's meduma. But some of it did come out. Says Rebbe Lezer, that some that comes out is treated completely like Truma. And therefore, you 100 times of it to nullify it. The Chachamim say, Eina meduma medameya elu lefi cheshbon. Meduma, the meduma mixture, could only create another meduma mixture based on the proportion of the Truma that is in it. Which means, according to the Chachamim, yes, I have a mixture here. And that which comes out of the mixture is treated in the same proportion as the mixture itself. When we have this mixture, when the Truma falls into the mixture, our assumption is that it spreads out evenly. That's the assumption that we make. And now, therefore, something that comes out of it has a similar type of proportion. Whatever the proportion was of the original mixture is now the same proportion of this amount that came out of the mixture. And therefore, when it falls into the next mixture, you're going to need 100 times against that proportion. Meaning you have to take 100 times against, you have to need 100 times more than the portion of Truma that's in that Sa'ah, which we figure out based on the original amount of Truma and its proportion to the original mixture that this came out from. Now, what's interesting is that we mentioned this yesterday, but it really comes out from what I see that it's an argument. And that is, in this kind of situation, where you're going to say that, okay, according to the Chachamim, all I need is 100 times against the portion of Truma in this part, in this grain that fell in. So again, the case is I have a mixture grain. Some of it now fell into other grain. So we say, according to the Chachamim, that you need in the new mixture 100 times more than the Truma part of what fell in. The question is, that Truma part, that what fell in from the meduma, according to the Chachamim, that's a mixture. It's a mixture of Truma and Chulin, which is why we say that I only need to nullify an amount against the Truma part. So so the other part of what fell in is Chulin. It's going to be Chulin based on the proportion of the original mixture that it came from. Can that portion of the sa that fell in, that's Chulin, combine with the new grain that it fell into to nullify the Truma portion? And we mentioned yesterday that it can't, but it's actually a machlok, it's actually an argument amongst the Rishonim, amongst early authorities, as to whether it would help or it wouldn't. Okay, once the Chachamim say this rule that meduma, meaning the forbidden mixture, can only create another forbidden mixture according to the proportion, we have other examples of where we use that phrase and that concept. Not exactly in the same way, but similarly. And a sourdough can only leaven according to its proportion. So the case is like this. The case is, I'm going to read to you from the Yad Avram. If sourdough of teruma was used to leaven a batch of dough needed of chulin flour, the entire dough is forbidden for consumption by a non-Kohen. Since the truma sourdough catalyst was sufficiently potent to ferment the chulin dough, the leavened dough is meduma. Since its effect is so manifestly evident in the dough, the standard proportion of 1 to 100 that usually determines whether truma is nullified in chulin or not does not apply. So the point is like this. The point is that you've got a sourdough that was potent enough to ferment this dough without on its own. Okay, you're talking about a sourdough of truma. This sourdough of truma, the whole thing's truma, and it is fermenting, leavening the dough. It's causing it to rise. So now, what we have now in this dough, we have a mixture. We have the dough, the flour was chulin, the sourdough was truma. We have a mixture. Now, at the end of the day, if we have a mixture, we say, well, if it's a mixture, then it's forbidden. But perhaps it's nullified, right? Maybe the amount of chulin dough that I have can nullify the sourdough. The answer is it can't. Because the rule is that since the sourdough is machmitzet, since the sourdough is what's making it ferment, so its effect is so evident in what we have here, you can't nullify it. It's not possible to nullify. So our starting point is where you've got a sourdough of truma, the whole thing was truma, fell into, it was used to ferment chulin flour. That means now this dough is a mixture, and as a mixture, it's forbidden, and it's not possible to nullify it because of the effect that it had on it. I mean, it rose because of this. You can't nullify it then. If the effect is so evident, it can't be nullified. Now, but that's the first step of this case of the Mishnah. The next step is, if, however, part of this newly leavened batch of dough fell into another batch of chulin dough and leavens it, the status of the latter batch of dough is determined by the proportion of truma in the newly leavened batch of the meduma dough. Therefore, unless a sufficient amount of so that means like this. That means that now we have a case. So now from that batch that was meduma, that had truma and chulin in it, now from that you took out a certain amount of dough and you used it. Okay, or rather, right, let's just say it fell in, right? Some of that meduma dough fell into another batch of flour, and it now made it rise. It fermented it. Okay, so now what fell in and what fermented this dough was a mixture. It wasn't only truma, it was a mixture. It was a mixture of truma and not truma. So what we have here right now is a dough that rose because of a sourdough that was really a mixture of truma and chulin. So now, therefore, unless a sufficient amount of truma sourdough is present in that newly leavened meduma batch to have leavened the second batch of chulin dough without the additional catalyst of its chulin component, the second batch of dough will not be prohibited to non-kohanim. In making this determination, the leavened meduma dough is only considered to be truma in proportion to the percentage of definite truma in the meduma. Okay, that means like this. That means that, so now in this new case, where the sourdough was a mixture of truma and chulin. So if there's enough truma if we could, based on the proportion, okay, based on the proportion of the original proportion, right? Even the sourdough, we look at it proportion-wise as to how much truma it has and how much chulin it has. Now, if we can say that the amount of truma in this sourdough that fell in, meaning in the meduma sourdough, in the mixture sourdough that fell in, if we can say that there's enough of that the truma portion of the sourdough that fell in would have been able to have caused this new dough to rise by itself, even without the other part. Meaning, even if, let's say, the chulin part that was there wasn't, the chulin part that did fall in with it wasn't there. And that would mean that the truma component would be enough to make the rise. Okay, then we say that it's like the original case. Then we say the truma made it rise. Truma made it rise. Its effect is evident. It's not going to become batel in the new dough. But if it couldn't do it on its own, it could only do it together with its chulin component. So then we have a rule called zev v'zeh geirim. Both things are causing. Each one can't do it on its own. They're both doing it together. And in that situation where both of them are doing it together, we actually consider it permissible, permitted. We don't look at the forbidden component. We actually focus more on the permissible component. And if that is so, it would come out then that, okay, so with this new dough, what am I left with, right? I don't have to say I'm not going to say I see the truma effect because it rose. No, it's not the truma that did it. It's the chulin and the truma that did it. So in that situation, since it's both that did it, so now I just now look at the truma component. I see its proportion, and based on its proportion, that'll make a difference if it can make this dough forbidden or not. If there's 100 times more of the new dough against it, it's going to nullify it. But that's only possible to say because the case is where this sourdough, this meduma sourdough, the sourdough that's a mixture of the truma and the chulin, being that the truma component could not have fermented the new dough on its own, so now already, therefore, the effect of the leavening of the dough is not seen as the effect of truma, and therefore now, based on the proportion of truma that's in it, that's now in this dough, I'll be able to know whether I have enough chulin to nullify the truma that fell in. Okay, and the last thing that's mentioned is the following: Ve'ein hamayim she'uben paislam es hamikveh el lefi cheshbon. And drawn water cannot invalidate a mikveh only according to the proportion. Okay, so a little review, let's learn some hilchas mikvahs. Okay, a mikveh is created when at least 40 sa'as of rainwater flow into a pool. You have to 40 sa of rainwater. Water that collected in vessels and was then poured into the pool is known as mayim she'uven, drawn water. A mikveh that consists primarily of such water is not valid. Okay. Moreover, if the basic 40 sa'as of rainwater are not yet present in the pool, and 3 lug, that's a liquid measure, of drawn water are poured into the growing pool, all the water in the pool is disqualified. Once, however, the pool already contains 21 sa'as of naturally accumulated rainwater, even drawn water can be used to complete the remaining 19 sa'as. Those 19 sa'as may not, however, be poured directly into the pool. Rather, the drawn water must be poured onto the ground outside the pool and then allowed to flow into the pool on its own. The resulting full pool of 40 sa'as of water is invalid for use as a mikvah. All right. So basically what's happening is like this. Initially, we start off saying that a mikveh has to be 40 sa'ah. Again, sa'ah is a volume. It has to be 40 sa'ah of rainwater. 40 sa'ah of rainwater. If it's going to be less than 40 sa'ah of rainwater and the other water is drawn water, that's no good. It's invalid. Not only that, if before I get my 40 sa'ah of rainwater, 3 lug of drawn water fall in, the whole thing is going to be invalid no matter how much water at the end comes in. However, if let's say I have 21 sa'ah of rainwater, it is possible for me now to complete my mikveh with drawn water, not by pouring it into the mikveh, but rather by doing what's called hamshacha. Hamshacha means I pour it on the ground, and now from the ground it flows into the mikveh. If I'm left with a majority, if that's for you to complete the mikveh, but you're starting off with a majority of rainwater, it's kosher. It's kosher. So now the Mishna is saying when it reads that the drawn water only validates the mikveh according to its proportion. So it means like this: if the proportion of conducted drawn water to naturally accumulated rainwater is such that the conducted drawn water constitutes 50% of the basic 40 sa'as, the resulting pool is not a valid mikveh. If, however, the conducted drawn water is a minority of the waters of the mikveh, the resulting mikveh is valid. So the proportion that the Mishna is talking about when it says the drawn water will invalidate a mikveh according to the proportion, it means the drawn water that you are now performing hamshacha on, you're pouring it on the ground, and it's going to go from the ground into the mikveh. The amount that's going to invalidate the mikveh by doing so will depend on the proportion of how much drawn water is in there. If the drawn water is the minority to the natural rainwater, then the halacha is that it will be a kosher mikveh. If it will not be the minority to the drawn water, to the rainwater, it will invalidate it. That's what it means when the Mishnah concludes here that drawn water invalidates the mikveh only according to its proportion. Prohibition against being intimate with a woman who is a nida. That means a woman who is considered unclean, rich, tamei, impure from her going through her menstruation period. Shenema, as it says, should not approach a woman while she is in the defilement of her menstrual uncleanness. One who transgresses this and is intimate with a woman who's a nida, even if the days of nida are over, her cycle, her period is over. As long as she has not immersed herself in a mikveh according to what the halacha says how to immerse, and this mikveh is 40 of water, both the man and the woman are liable to the punishment of kares, premature death. The child born from it is considered blemished. Okay. A woman who gives birth is impure or forbidden to her husband, like a nida, like a woman who went through her menstrual cycle. Halachically, even if she didn't bleed when she gave birth, tameya, she is impure. Ben yoldachai, ben yoldefel, whether the child lived or the child was an ephel, was a miscarriage. Chavetz Chaim writes, and in our areas, 7 days after a boy, 14 days after a girl, if she is pure from any kind of blood, she can do the hefsek tahara internal check. That refers to that after a woman finishes bleeding, she has to make an internal check to basically see if her bleeding is done. And she begins to count her 7 clean days. This is what a woman does all the time. But the Chavetz Chaim is specifically talking about by the Yoledes, by the woman who gave birth, that once she has stopped bleeding, once she stopped bleeding, again, for a boy 7 days, for a girl 14 days, she can do the hefsek tahara, she can do the internal check to check that now she can begin her purification process, and she begins to count 7 clean days without blood, and without, including all the halachas that are involved in doing that. Afterwards, she goes to the mikveh, and she would be permissible to her husband. Now, if she bleeds after going to the mikveh, then she becomes forbidden to her husband, like all women. What is intimate with a woman who recently gave birth before she went to the mikveh, it's the same thing as a person who is being intimate with a nida. Okay, this mitzvah is a little bit on the longer side, and therefore we will continue it tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.